Well, let's get started. We're diving into some major global happenings today, the kind of stuff that could really shake up the world order and, you know, definitely the type of thing that could show up on your UPSC exams. It's like your daily dose of UPSC mains and current affairs, but, you know, also relevant for prelims. We're going off of some reporting from the Indian Express. They've been covering some pretty high-level diplomacy lately, stuff that's got everybody talking.
It's definitely an interesting time in international relations. We've got Prime Minister Modi meeting with President Trump. But what makes this meeting even more interesting is all this talk about a potential U.S.-Russia reset. Like, are they going to be buddies again?
Okay, so let's unpack this potential shift in global power a bit. We know President Trump had that phone call with President Putin recently, right? And some people are even comparing it to, like, huge historical turning points, like the Yalta Conference.
Yeah.
What makes this call so important?
Well, for over a decade, the West has basically been trying to isolate Russia, especially after what happened in Ukraine. But this phone call, it's like a signal that the U.S. might be changing its tune. It's not just a chat. It's like acknowledging Russia as a major player on the world stage. You know, Trump even talked about how the U.S. and Russia worked together in World War II. It's a big change from how the last administration handled things.
Yeah, it's a good point. It really is a stark contrast to the Biden administration's approach. Remember those Geneva talks between Biden and Putin a few years back?
Yeah.
Those went nowhere, right?
Exactly. Putin went into those talks with some pretty strong demands, and nothing really came of it now, though. With the war in Ukraine dragging on and Russia facing all sorts of internal pressures, it seems like they might be more open to finding a way out. And President Trump, he's pushing for peace talks. He even hinted at maybe going to Moscow for Russia's Victory Day celebration. It would be a huge symbolic gesture. That would really solidify this change in U.S. policy.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold move for sure.
Mm.
And it's definitely got a lot of people worried, especially in Europe. We know that the U.S. recently said no to Ukraine joining NATO, and they've been telling Europe they need to take care of their own security. Is this Trump's way of saying, hey, Europe, you're on your own?
There's definitely some anxiety in Europe about what a closer U.S.-Russia relationship could mean for their security. Some European leaders are worried that it could make Russia bolder and maybe even lead to more instability in the region. And this is where things get interesting for our UPSC folks. This whole power shift thing has some big implications for Asia, especially India. It's like a ripple effect. You know, global events changing things up close to home.
Totally. If the U.S. and Russia do end up getting all chummy again, what happens to that whole Moscow-Beijing partnership? Does it fall apart? Or do China and Russia just get closer?
That's the big question, isn't it? There are a few ways this could go. On the one hand, Russia might feel more comfortable moving away from China if they've got the U.S. in their corner. But then again, it could also push China and Russia closer together if they both start seeing the West as a threat, you know?
And how would each of those scenarios impact India? A stronger China-Russia alliance. Doesn't sound great from a strategic perspective.
Yeah, it definitely makes things more complicated for India. It could mean more pressure on India's borders and maybe even limit India's options in international stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. So this meeting between Modi and Trump becomes even more important. It's not just about trade and stuff. It's about figuring out where India fits in this whole new world order.
Think back to the mid-20th century. India was a big player in World War II, but when it came to shaping the world afterwards, they didn't have much say. This time around, India's in a much stronger position. But this new multipolar world, it's tricky navigating it. It requires some serious strategic thinking and some agile diplomacy. This meeting with Trump, it's a chance for Modi to figure out what the U.S. is really thinking and make sure India's interests are protected.
Sounds like India has a real opportunity to shape things this time around. But there are some big risks, too. How can India use its position without getting caught in the middle of all this power play?
That's the challenge, right? India has to keep those strong partnerships going with players like the U.S., but also engage with Russia and China in a way that makes sense. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Okay, so let's talk economics. The U.S. and India both have pretty big trade deficits with China, and we know some of Trump's people are pushing for a new economic order, one that's led by democracies. Is this the beginning of a whole new economic bloc, one that could rival China?
It's definitely possible, and this is where Modi's visit gets really interesting. It's not just about arguing over tariffs, it's about maybe restructuring the whole global economic system. And if this new Yalta does happen, India could have a big role to play in shaping this new economic order.
So, for all you UPSC folks out there, this is something you really need to think about. We could be seeing a major shift in global power, and that means big changes for international relations and the global economy.
Exactly. And here's the big question for our listeners today. If this new Yalta really happens, what should India's role be? How can they make sure their interests are protected and they can really make a mark on the world stage?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And it's not an easy one. It needs, a deep understanding of international relations, global economics, India's foreign policy. It's the kind of question that could definitely show up on your UPSC exams.
Absolutely. There are no simple answers. It's a messy situation, lots of moving pieces. But if you understand the history, the current situation, and all the possible outcomes, well, you'll be ready to form your own opinions, informed ones.
So what do you think? What should India do in this changing world? We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more deep dives on current events that are relevant to the UPSC syllabus.
That's right. And remember, today's deep dive was based on reporting from the Indian Express. So until next time, keep those brains working and happy studying.